So I want to just start by saying thank you guys for being here. I'm so glad to see so many people interested in beekeeping. How many people in the room are already beekeepers? All right, that's a lot. And when you say you're beekeepers, who's been beekeeping for 3 years or more? Oh yeah, so I think we're going to have a nice discussion then. Lots of people can give different types of advice. What is the old cliche about beekeepers? You ask, if you have 10 beekeepers in a room, you get 12 opinions on whatever the question is, right? So always welcome for that. Okay, well, I am so pleased that we have Adam and Alex here today. First, I want to say just a few words about Adam. Dr. Ingrao, in fact. He's the Veterans Liaison and Agricultural Entomologist for Michigan State University Extension, where he runs the Heroes to Hives program. I hope you guys have been able to go out and see. He has a table in the extension section, so maybe you've been able to have some one-on-one time with him as well. He also serves as Michigan State co-coordinator for the USDA's North Central Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. And finally, we should mention that he has his own farm, Bee Wise Farm, in 2 locations, both urban and rural. And I think you can offer some perspective on that as well, the urban beekeeping versus rural. Yeah. And then Alex is the owner and operator of Furry Bees and Pollination. And I actually just want to, instead of me talking about him, this isn't working. Can you advance it? Oh, did it? Okay. And we're gonna, yeah, he's gonna show the video. Yeah?
For Alex Harrigy, the journey began 5 years ago in Afghanistan.
We found two IEDs. My team leader called me and said that they found a 3rd device, and so we were walking to the 3rd device when I stepped on the 4th device.
Alex nearly died from the explosion, but through grit, determination, and 2 new metal legs, he found himself working again and at peace with the honeybees in Woodland. The buzzing of thousands of honeybees is actually calming for Alex because his bees are pollinating the almond trees and helping to grow food for farmers.
Did you ever imagine that one day you would be here standing in a beehive with a self-sustaining business?
Never would have imagined I would have been a beekeeper.
With more than 600 hives, these honeybees are a sweet business for Alex, but he wouldn't be here today if not for the Farmer Veteran Coalition.
Our mission is mobilizing veterans to feed America.
Michael O'Gorman is a lifelong farmer dedicated to helping men and women in the military find careers in agriculture, and he knew Alex needed something special.
Alex told me he needed something to safely move the bees, and he runs a pollination company. And so we found what he needed.
It's called the Hummerbee, a forklift that provides machine muscle that's perfect for Alex.
And then this clamp right here, specifically, it's meant to hold 2 different pallets. So in total, you're holding 8 different hives.
But the forklift costs $30,000, so the Farmer Veteran Coalition teamed up with 2 other nonprofits to purchase Alex's ride and mobility that gives Alex a new mission in life.
It's about having a purpose, for sure. Feeling that you're giving in a way or contributing to society in a way.
And now the bees are finding a new pathway for Alex Harrigy. In Woodland, Mike Lurie, KCRA 3 News.
Thanks. So I think on that note, we should start with you, Alex.
Sure.
What got you involved with beekeeping? What made you decide you wanted to become a beekeeper? Is this on? Can everybody hear?
So I retired in April 2014. When I first got out, I was initially trying to get a job out in the sector, just anything really. And I found out that it was very hard to get a job. Initially when I got out, I thought, oh, I'm a veteran, everyone's going to hire me, but I found out very quickly that that wasn't the case. And so I found that in the agriculture community, having the disabilities that I have, a lot of people were scared to hire me. It's not that they didn't want to hire me, they were just scared because of my disabilities. And so I couldn't get a job, and my brother-in-law works for an almond grower. And so initially we started looking into maybe planting an orchard, because I have 5 acres. We quickly realized that that was very expensive to get into. And so my brother-in-law suggested bees. And so we went to Man-Made, which is where we go buy supplies and stuff. And they had a hell of a salesman that suckered us into the sale where he's telling us oh, it's the best sale we've ever had. It's the last day, and so we bought 1,000 frames, not ever having read a book about bees. We just went to the store about prices. And so we bought 1,000 frames, and when we were driving home, we're all sweating, like, oh, we're into this now, so it's too late to back out. And so we started looking up YouTube videos on how to do it. And found somebody that sells packages, and that's how we started. We started with 75 beehives. Right now we're at like 640 that we're going to rent out that I think will be good for pollination. We're probably close to 700, but some of them are only 2-framers, so we won't put those out for pollination.
Wow. Starting with 75, I can't even imagine. I started with 2.
It was definitely a wake-up call for us. It wasn't just buying bees and putting them out in the field somewhere and letting them keep up on their own.
Right. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, so when I got out of the military, I'm service-connected disabled vet as well. I got out on a med board, and I had a training accident, messed up my knee, ankle, and back. And when I got out, my big transition was I was still not able to walk when I got out. And so it was basically getting out, having a family one day, and that family's gone the next day, and you're back at the VA back home. And I really struggled. I was being fed a pretty steady diet of opiates from the VA, and I had my own struggles with that. And it really wasn't until my wife, who is a psychologist, started to recommend, we need to figure out something to kind of get things moving. And so I went back to school using my GI Bill, and I went back to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, was studying agriculture there, and the first semester I was there, I took a beekeeping class. And that beekeeping class literally transformed my life. So it went from really feeling like I didn't have much direction, there was no mission to serve, just pretty much being lost, to actually feeling like I had a new mission, and that new mission was to protect the most important managed pollinator on the planet and ensure our food security for this nation. And that was something I could really get behind. I felt like I was serving again. And from that moment on, I have completely dedicated my life to both providing education for veterans around beekeeping, but also being a beekeeper myself. And it has transformed my life. I now tell folks, when we talk about, the psychologists and psychiatrists at the VA, I don't go to those psychologists or psychiatrists anymore. My bees are my psychologists and my psychiatrists. And when I have a bad day, I go out and hang out with my bees. And a lot of the veterans I work with, they'll tell you the same thing, that it is an opportunity to continue to serve. It's an opportunity to have something that is rewarding as far as financially, but the therapy portion of it is tremendous.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well then, what do you think? I mean, you both kind of jumped into beekeeping without any knowledge about it, not any experience, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think you did bring into beekeeping that you already knew? What are some of the skill sets or that you had that helped you with beekeeping?
I think my biggest skill set that I brought was my work ethic from the military. Being military, you guys know it's not a 9-to-5 job, and so the long hours in the commercial side of it, there's a lot of long hours, especially during the spring when you have when you're doing splits or when you're moving bees. There's a lot of long hours, and so that's probably my biggest thing that I brought from the military was my work ethic.
Yeah, I'd agree. And for all of you, I think that's what we bring to agriculture in general, is that work ethic, that dedication to duty, knowing that you got to be the one that gets up every morning and maintains those animals. It's the self-motivation, knowing that you got to be out there in the bee yard inspecting your bees. You just can't let them do their own thing. So I think the things that we learn in the military, they transfer very, very smoothly over to agriculture in general and beekeeping as well.
Was there anything, though, that was even more than that really surprised you? Because I don't think, for me, that didn't surprise me about working in agriculture. It's my work ethic and not being afraid to just do the mission until it got done. That's what we learned to do in the military. But what were some things that surprised you that were suited to beekeeping specifically?
The amount of work. Like I said, whenever I wouldn't even notice hives before I was a beekeeper out there, even though I lived in Northern California around nothing but almond orchards. You would just think that it's just all people buy beehives and they put them out in the field and they just kind of do their thing. No, especially when you're talking about a big scale yard, there's a lot of work. So that's what I wake up call for me.
I think one of the skill sets, and I mean, I think that transfers nicely over and was a little surprising for me was equipment maintenance. So, in the military, I worked on Patriot missile radar systems, and maintenance was a big thing of what we did. And it's the same thing with beekeeping. You've got equipment to maintain, you got bees to maintain, and that regular kind of operating cycle that you go through in the military, it again transfers very easily. But the maintenance, and I actually have students of mine. We just did a video for Michigan State University Extension, and one of my students who is one of our trainers said the same thing, that actually his experience in maintaining equipment actually helps him quite a lot in beekeeping.
Yeah. I would say for me, I was a pilot, and I think about going out to my hives in terms of pre-flight, operation, and post-flight. And I tell that I don't have any veterans who are my mentees, but that's what I tell my mentees is that, pre-flight, i.e. you read the book, so you read your log that you wrote from maybe not just even the last visit, but maybe 2 and 3 visits ago, and to see if there's a pattern. And then I go and I'm looking at my hive before I even walk in. Are bees flying in? Does it look healthy? Or, all my apiaries have at least 3 hives, so is there a difference between the 3 hives in terms of flying? Is there more bees in one? Or nothing? Is something happening? We have a lot of rain in Washington, D.C., or we did this year. So one time I walked up and one of my hives was completely skilted because there was so much mud. And in fact, that hive died because all the water got, it had been 2.5, 3 weeks since I'd been there, and all the water got accumulated in the hive, and that was just one part of, they didn't die because of that, but it was one of the factors. And then I take good notes while I'm inspecting. Sometimes that's just verbal. Siri, open my, open notes. And then post-flight is to really reflect on what happened and write up on it in my notes, or for my hive journal. And that's definitely something I would never have thought of before becoming a beekeeper, that would be, but that was ingrained in me as a pilot, obviously. It's regulation. But that mindset was ingrained in me, and it really has helped me with keeping track of my bees.
Yeah.
Especially if you have more than 2 hives, it's impossible unless you're just a savant to walk away from your hives and remember anything that you saw. Yeah, note taking is like any kind of agriculture, and like when you work with USDA, like the first thing they're going to ask you for is your records, right? So keeping good records of your bees, after action reports, things like that when you get in a hive, like that's very valuable data, and really can make a huge difference. And if you have more than a couple hives, you're never going to keep track of what's going on in all those hives if you don't take good notes. Yeah.
So I'll talk more about the ways we do things, because when you're running 600 hives, you can't, take notes is not really the way we do markings on our days, and I'll talk more about that. But really with us, is a lot of it is task at hand. So if you're going to feed, you're going to feed. If you sit there and you go to feed, and you notice something wrong with your hive, and you can't check every single hive in detail, otherwise you're not going to accomplish the task at hand. But again, I'll talk more about that, but it's always task at hand. There are days that you're going to go fix hives, and when you do that, we take queens on hand, we take extra boxes, syrup, feeders, any problem that you could run into, and we fix it on hand. Because again, if you don't fix it there, with us at our scale, we're not going to have enough time. Because the next day we go to another yard, we're not going to have enough time to come back around or even remember which hive. So notes is absolutely crucial with bees.
Yeah, but I guess a luxury.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well then, sorry. What did you learn through the process of becoming a beekeeper that you did not realize that you needed to know? You had some ideas of what it meant to start a hive, and then to start, 75 hives, I meant to say, not one. You didn't just dive in. You had to do some things to prepare for it, but what were some things that you did not know you needed to know that would be helpful for the audience?
Yeah, so I think my biggest lesson that I'm telling you is, like I said, task at hand. Like I just said, if you're going to feed, you're going to feed. If you're going to treat for mites, you're going to treat for mites. There are days that you're going to go fix things. One of the things I found that we covered ourselves doing all the time was looking for the queen. And that is the most time-consuming thing. And once you start learning how to work a beehive, you can tell whether a beehive has a queen or not, and simply just looking for the eggs. So if you have a queen that's laying eggs and you're seeing fresh eggs, you know that the hive is queen right. So you don't have to sit there and search for the queen every time, especially when you're new. That can take a long, long time. And if you're doing a lot of hives, you're going to end up doing a quarter of it, if even that. So stop looking for the queen, just know what to look for, and know what identifies whether your hive is queen right or not.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that all of you should be very well aware of getting into the beekeeping industry is that this romanticized idea of the beekeeper who goes out, puts their hives out, and then comes and collects honey at the end of the season, that was beekeeping in the early 1900s. It is not modern day beekeeping. Our job as modern day beekeepers are to manage these bees like we do any kind of livestock. So your pests that you have to deal with, varroa mite specifically, which is a parasitic mite that is a global epidemic, that is your number one job as a beekeeper, is managing that mite. Because if you don't, I guarantee you, you will lose your hives every single year. So one of the things that came out for me right away, and I had a very good mentor at Cal Poly, was that is your number one priority, is monitoring and managing mites. And then all the pathogens that come along with it, European foul brood, American foul brood. So it's not just learning the bees. Learning the biology of the bees and the management of the bees is one part of beekeeping. But understanding the pests and pathogens that you're dealing with is supremely important in the beekeeping industry, the modern beekeeping industry. So that was something that I did not anticipate. I mean, I grew up around beekeepers. My dad had a really good friend that was a beekeeper, and in the early 80s, it was pretty much just the bees were out there, and you went and collected your honey, and you managed the bees pretty easily. But it's not that way anymore. And I think that's a big misconception. A lot of the students that come into the Heroes to Hives program, they'll tell me that they don't have varroa mites in their beehives. And I tell them, so how do you know that? And they say, well, I don't see them. And I say, well, you're never going to see them. You've got to actually manage, you've got to monitor them. And we have ways that we do that. And so those are really important things to understand, getting into it.
I was just going to say, like you said, a lot of times you can just tell just by looking at the patterns. A lot of times when I drive through my yards, I'll just see if I'm seeing bees coming in. Like eczema, you can notice just from the outside of the hive. If you walk up to your hive and you see bees outside that are dead or are wingless, you know that if they're wingless, especially, you know that you might have a mite problem. So there's a lot of things that you can do. The more times you open the hive, every time you open your hive and you take a frame out, you're risking killing your queen. So, like I said, don't go out and just open your hive just because you don't have anything to do. Because every time you open your hive, you pull a frame out. You're risking to either crush your queen, warrior queen. You know, she's on the lid, dropping her outside the hive. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's really good point. The other thing, for me, I mean, there were lots of things I didn't know, actually. So many things. We don't have enough time in the day to talk about all the things I didn't know. But one thing that I think is really important to share is I didn't think about other beekeepers and how my beekeeping practices affected them, i.e. affected their bees. So if I did not treat my bees for mites, I was putting at risk my fellow beekeepers in the region. And I'm an urban beekeeper, so the vector rate is really, really shallow or short, or however you say it, doctor. So you really have to be cognizant of what is happening, how your management is going to affect others. And that was something I didn't think about that. But I think that's the same case for no matter where you're beekeeping.
To add to that one, whenever I'm next to another beekeeper or close in close vicinity, we get together and we treat for mites at the same time. So if he's treating for, we get on the same cycle. And the reason for that is if I treat my bees for mites and he's not treating, then his mites with drift are just going to get into my hive, so it's kind of pointless. So keeping in touch with other beekeepers is, if they'll share information, because there's a lot of them that won't.
Yeah. At the commercial scale, I mean, that's a really great way to do things. So, and I think one of the things that you'll realize is that Alex being at a commercial scale, like my apiary, we run 50 hives. And so it's very different management techniques. But one of the things that I think that I realized, particularly in our urban apiary, is that this idea of individuals not taking care of the bees. At the commercial scale, you guys got a lot invested in these bees, and they're generally taking pretty good care of the bees. At the hobby or the small scale, you have a lot of folks that watch YouTube and do a lot of crazy stuff to their bees. And that is problematic. So like at our urban apiary in Lansing, I generally lose very few beehives every year. But a couple years ago, we had a 5-year-old hive that I had, one of our best performing hives, that was taken out in the fall by exactly what you're talking about. And we call them varroa bombs. And it's essentially that a hive that someone's not managing properly gets such a high varroa mite count that the entire hive just says, screw this, and leaves. And they join another hive with all the mites coming with it. And so we had a 5-year-old hive that was very healthy that was completely taken out by another hive joining it. So what other people do that are close to you is going to directly impact your bees very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, amazing. That could be one of the best lessons of today's session. Okay, and so next question is, now that you're established and you're completely different, doing two different things, what is the most important next step for you? Whether it's in your professional development or your beekeeping development, like what is your next most important step? What do you see happening?
To me, I'm at the point where I need to start hiring people, and so that's one thing I have no clue how to do, is how to, the legal ramifications of everything that comes with hiring an employee. So that's my next hurdle, is figuring out how to run more of a business side portion of it.
How are you going to do that? Or how are you going to prepare yourself for
I
that?
have a great mentor, and we actually just talked about it last week, and he's at a point where he doesn't want to be paid his guys too much overtime, so we're going to employee share. So he's going to work his guys during the week. Most of my work is done in either the afternoons, because I'm partnered with my brother who has a full-time job, and my brother-in-law, and so most of our work is either done in the afternoons or the weekends. So he's just going to employ his employees on the weekends and give whatever the hours are busy. So that's my plan right now, but again, yeah, I gotta read more and educate myself more about what I need to do to start paying people.
So our big next step in my personal beekeeping operation, so our kind of thing is varietal honey. So we do honeys that are gathered from specific plants. We harvest many times during the season so that we can get those nuanced flavors of honey, which allows us to charge a premium for our honey. So the big thing that we're focusing on is continuing to develop our line of specialized honey. So like this year, our 40-acre farm up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, we've been planting lavender there for years. And this year we got our first crop of lavender honey. And so that's one of our big things, is to continue to specialize in those markets and ensure that we have a nice, we do honey flights. So when you come to our farmer's market booth, I have 5 different varieties of honey that we produce that you can taste side by side. And it allows customers to have a really interesting experience with honey. I think one of the things that we focus on, in addition to the varietal stuff, is improving the knowledge of the public regarding honey. So honey is not a sugar substitute. Honey is a product unto its own and should be treated specially as a product. And about 70% of the honey that you buy in the United States is counterfeit honey. So being able to get pure honey from a local beekeeper and developing that relationship, whether it be through varietal honeys or just personal touch, that's what we really focus on and will continue to focus on as we build our business.
That sounds great. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move it to some more concrete, tangible questions. I'm going to keep it real, yeah? So the first one is, how much capital did you have to commit to right from the start? And can we talk about finances?
When I started, it was, like I said, it was me, my brother, and my brother-in-law. We started with $10,000, so $30,000 is what we started with. That did not buy us a forklift though, or we had to go, but that's how we started. $30,000 got us a flatbed, the pallets, and everything we started on a commercial scale. When you do commercial, 4-way pallets, stuff like that, it's something you don't need to buy for doing it as a hobby, but as a commercial scale. And I'll get into prices on my slideshow and stuff like that. But we started with $30,000.
So I started beekeeping when I was an undergraduate, living on a GI Bill. So we didn't have very little capital. I started with 2 beehives that were basically gifted to us from my professor at Cal Poly. And I managed them at the Cal Poly apiary for the 4 years that I was there. When we moved to Michigan, after I had finished my bachelor's degree, we actually got our first capital to start up from an FVSC fellowship. So that bought us our first 5 beehives in Michigan, because we sold our stuff when we left California. And so that's actually how we started, was with an FVSC fellowship. And those 5 beehives, the bees I have now are still from those original 5 beehives. And now we run 50 hives. So we're just off of splits. We were able to increase to that scale, and we sell a lot of splits every year. So we sell usually about 30 to 40 nukes every year as well.
Great. Okay.
Can you want to talk about nucleus?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, so, I'm sorry. A hive nucleus is essentially a 5-frame beehive. So it's 5 frames with all of the elements of a full beehive. So it's a fully functioning beehive that you basically can purchase and install into your own equipment. The alternative to that is the package, which is basically just a box of bees that you pour into a hive. So it's kind of like a more established hive. In northern climates, it's really critical to get nukes rather than packages because the packages start too slow. And like where I live in Michigan, literally from late May to late September is our window. And it takes a long time for a package to get going in a climate like that. And usually you don't have enough buildup by the end of the season. So we sell nukes in our region to support beekeepers that way.
Good to know you're not selling them to your boss.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to stay away from that stuff.
Okay, so my next question is specifically about the work you two do, but also I know I mean, you're basically a pollinator, and you do sell honey, but you also do so much of your education aspect. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about how long it takes to turn a profit, whether you're doing pollinating or you're selling honey, and I want to stress that it's a long road.
Yeah.
With us, I said we started with $30,000. By our second year, we were able to double that and not put a single dollar out of pocket. And we each took out $5,000 to pay ourselves. So I would say that we turned profit the next year.
Oh, yeah.
I do have friends that my mentor just bought a bunch of, I think he bought 1,000 hives. And so he bought them ready for pollination, so he'll be able to pay back whatever he put into them just in pollination. Mm-hmm. And so his plan is to separate the bees that he bought for pollination, split them after pollination, and sell them. So he'll double his profit in just one season.
Is that unusual for pollination or no?
No. So for
normal.
pollination, I think an average bee, if you were to break it down for one beehive, you're in about $180. If you're not going with the fancy, drip system and all that stuff, you're in about $180. And pollination contracts right now, when you do a pollination contract, you're guaranteeing a 5-frame minimum, 8-frame average. And so our rate is $190, and we're on the lower end. You can get anywhere from $190 to $220 for pollination. So if you're buying a beehive for $180, renting it out for $190 is pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and Alex is in like the perfect place to do this. I mean, being where he's located, I mean, he is near all the almond orchards. For us, so for honey producers, especially small-scale honey producers, usually the way that I teach in northern climates, the thing you have to consider with northern climates is that we have a long winter, and you have to have enough honey to get through the winter. So on average, we leave about 150 pounds of honey on every hive that we have. So it usually takes about 2 years before you actually have enough buildup to where you're actually harvesting off of that. So I'd say for our business, we started turning a profit our 3rd year on honey. Honey is a very valuable commodity, and let me tell you, if you've got honey, you're going to sell out every single year. I cannot keep honey in stock. And so it is really profitable. For the small scale folks though, I think where really the money comes in is honey is one of them, but selling bees is another one. We sell nukes for $175 to $200 a piece, and I can sell those all day long. So, think about especially on the small scale where it's not pollination contracts you're after, it's honey, it's selling bees. If you're able to raise queens, it's raising queens. And it's also all those value added products that you come out of your bees. So all of that wax that you pull, whatever you're making out of it, my wife makes salves, lip balms, all sorts of stuff out of that. So there's a lot of ways to really make quite a lot of money off of the commodities that you're taking from those hives. And so yeah, our 3rd year, we started turning a profit out of our beekeeping side of the business, I'll say that. The other side of the business, which is essentially cut flowers, that is still a work in progress.
Well, also, when you're doing honey production, if it's small enough scale, you don't really have to buy that much equipment after the 1st year.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to buy so much the 1st year, but then it's really, yeah. So, and that's where all the money goes, the capital, that's its own cost.
That's what my mentor told me, is that once you get to a number where you want to stay at, that's when you really start making the big bucks, right? Because like I said, with me me, my goal is to get 5,000 to 7,000 hives. We're at 600, we have enough room for 800 hives right now. So every year we're trying to dump as much money back into the business while still keeping that, we don't want to be working for free for the rest of our life, so we're still trying to take some profit. Once you're at a level where you're comfortable, you don't have to be buying equipment every year, then we're going to turn some really good profits.
And plus, you find that it's actually really fun. I mean, maybe you already find that it's fun anyway, but to assemble equipment, to fix equipment, it's very therapeutic. That's the therapy you get in the winter, I find. Okay, we talked a little bit about keeping track of our hives and what's happening in their hives. How do you concretely do that? Like, which do you have an app? Do you have a computer program? Do you have an Excel spreadsheet? What do you do to keep track of your business and your bees?
Like I said, on a commercial scale for us, we use a crayon, a marker, and so on the lids we have markings for everything, right? So for instance, if we have the queen's hive, we'll put a dash and a Q, and then whenever we queen it right, we'll put a plus on it, so we'll just put T on it and with a date. And so every marking we have, and we all know our markings, so every marking we have means something. And just a mental note, right? If I'm going to feed and I know that I had five hives without a queen, I'm going to keep a mental note to obviously try to get back. Because if you don't queen right your hive, it's going to die out within a month. Right? Because a bee life is only 21 days. If you guys knew that, but a bee life is only 21 days. So a hive going 30 days without a queen is just, it's going to kill it. Yeah. If they don't make their own queen.
Do you do anything beyond the markings on your hives?
No.
No. Okay.
No. I tried to do an app that I downloaded. I tried to sell one actually, but it's just on the commercial scale, it's still time consuming.
Yeah.
So I know one of my mentors, they have an app where they put a barcode on each lid, and so it's very quick because you just scan it. I don't know how much that costs. At my level, we're not to the point where we can do that. So at our scale, one thing I do is I number all my hives, which not everyone does. And the reason for that is because if I'm not going back to my bee yard, I can tell my brother-in-law, hey, beehive number 220 has this problem. And we just, so I guess the text, we text everything. If we do find a problem, we'll text it on our group, and that way we can go back to our text message.
Yeah, so I use essentially a Google form. So I developed a Google form, and I have a link right to the form on my phone, and I can pull up the form, and it has drop-down menus with all of my apiary names, all of the hive numbers, and I literally just click the number and then write in whatever the description is. And so the things that we track in our forms are the date, the hive number, and we use ear tags for our hives because I've found over the years that writing on the hives, it wears out over time. So I use ear tags. And then basically what we have on the form is the hive queen right? So what is the queen status? How many frames of bees do we have? And that just gives us a rough estimate of how big the hive is. How many boxes are on the hive? And then basically what is the varroa mite count? And is there any disease presence or any symptoms of disease? And I type that in on my phone, it populates into a spreadsheet on my Google Drive, and basically before I go out anytime to an apiary, I pull up my Google Drive, I look through all of my hives that I'm going to, and I look and I say, oh, okay, I told myself I need to bring an extra super for this hive, or this hive wasn't queen right last time I'm there, I need to check and make sure it's queen right, or I need to bring a queen with me. So it's just an easy way to keep yourself on track. It's hard remembering all of this stuff. And I've used the technique that Alex used when I first started because I learned from a commercial beekeeper, was my mentor. And commercial beekeepers, that's how you do it. You don't want volumes of 600 pages of paperwork every time you go to a yard. And so using the top of a hive is really useful for notes. I still do it sometimes. What I would recommend, though, if you were doing it as a small-scale beekeeper, is at the end of the season, take a picture of those notes and put them somewhere. Because if you live anywhere like I live, those notes are going to be gone by the time spring hits because of the weather. So always make sure that you're keeping those records because they are valuable records and they're going to influence your decisions. And when you get a little more advanced into your beekeeping regimen and in your operation, one of the things that you're going to look at is the success of certain hives. Some hives are going to be much better performers than others, and you want to take those genetics, and that's the hive you want to do a split from, or you want to raise queens from. And by having that data, you can make those smart decisions later on. I am not going to remember what happened last season when I come to a hive in spring doing splits. But if I have my notes and I say, man, this hive was just dynamite, you need to take as many splits as you can from that, or you need to raise as many queens as you can from that, that's good information to have, and it makes a big difference in your operation in the long term.
If you have the time, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
The more information you have, the better, for sure.
But it's all economies of scale, and I think you're seeing that between us, is that at a large scale, you're doing very different things, because you don't have 8 hours to spend in a 10 hive apiary. Like that's not possible. But at a 50 hive scale, I can spend a full day going through 25 hives. So it's just a very different experience. But both have very important roles in agriculture in general.
How much, on a visit, how much can you do yourself, and how much does it require you to have other people working with you?
So in my experience, my mentors always told me that it used to be one beekeeper for every 1,000 hives throughout the year. I think it's more like 1 per 500 right now. But if you stay with the task at hand, you can run through bees. I mean, we can go to the yard. We keep 20 pallets, which is 40 pallets, so we keep 80 hives in the yard. And I can run through that. If I'm just doing a light treatment, I can run through that in 2 hours.
Right.
And move on. Depending if I'm checking, I'm going to spend a whole day on the yard. On the yard.
And you could essentially, but if you didn't have any partners, you could just be by yourself doing this all by yourself.
My skill, yes.
Yeah.
Well, with my disability, probably not. But my brother, if my brother wanted another full time, he can do everything needed for the amount of times I can by himself.
I mean, I can pretty much do everything on my own. I was not able to in the beginning, mainly because of lifting restrictions, but actually through an FVC fellowship, I got a hive lift, and that has enabled me to do everything on my own. So now I can actually, pick up individual hive bodies wherever I want on the stack of a beehive, so that, if I've got 200 pounds of honey on there, I don't have to lift that 200 pounds of honey off. I just click in my hive lift, it lifts it up, and I can get down in the brood chamber and start doing my work. But we do take interns every year, and mainly because I do sometimes need help. I mean, I work full-time for Michigan State. And so I take a veteran on every single year that basically shadows me the whole season. And then we also participate in an exchange program with the U.S. State Department, where we bring in interns from East Africa every year. So the last 2 years we've had an intern from Kenya and then also one from Uganda that has worked with me all season as well. And so it's nice to have extra hands. I'll tell you that much. I mean, heavy boxes are not fun to lift over a long period of time, and none of us are getting any younger, so.
Can you use that hive lift for moving a hive?
Yeah, it does everything. It's called the Kaptar lift, Kaptar. And it was developed in Hungary. I think there's an American knockoff now. But it is essentially, you basically can grab, it uses basically a tensioner that grabs onto anywhere on the hive. And you can literally lift up the hive, or you can lift up the entire hive. And so, for example, like when I'm moving hives from another apiary, I have a pickup truck. I literally can clamp onto that hive, lift it all the way up, and slide it right into my truck without ever having to lift the hive on my own.
Wow, because that was going to be my thing, is that I can do everything on my own as well, except move a hive.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, wow. Like, maybe I should have FVC fellowship. For
you all should be
myself.
applying for FVC fellowships for these types of things, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about, we could talk about this all day, so maybe briefly, but the seasonality of beekeeping. I mean, in your case, you're not traveling all over the country, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what pollinators do for that and how, some of the restraints that can have on your personal life and how challenging that can be in terms of the seasonality of pollination. And maybe you can talk also about the seasonality of being a honey producer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I'm understanding you, but so with us, for almond pollination, it's from February. This year with the wet winter, we went all the way through like mid-April. Normally we'd be doing splits by beginning of April. But basically we move our bees into the orchards in February. If we bring them up So 90% of all bees in all of America will end up in California during the almond pollination. And so for us, I can't really tell you anything about the migrating bees in California, but as far as putting them into the orchards, we try to move bees at the end of January, beginning of February. They'll stay in the orchard and then pull them out right after all the bloom comes out. But whenever you do move bees, you always want to move bees at night or early in the morning before the sun comes out, right? Preferably in the morning, so like 2 o'clock in the morning. You want to be in the yard before the sun starts to come out and already offloaded if you can be. But on a family scale, I mean, that's a lot of long hours when you're moving bees at night. So.
And you don't do any pollinating outside of the almond, like you don't move on to other parts of the country with your bees?
We don't. No, actually, I live in Woodland, California, and so all my accounts, is what we call it for pollinator, are within 50 miles. So we don't move very far at all.
So then your season ends in terms of that type of work in April?
We've never gone into the summer crop, which we're going to this year. And the reason is because of how many hives, how hard it is on the bees. At our scale, we didn't want to take the risk of losing a lot of bees because, losing for us, losing 200 hives is taking out quite a big percentage of it. So we've never got into the summer crops, which means like any summer crop, cucumbers, sunflower, safflower, especially the cucumbers, you spray them so much and it kills a lot of bees. But this coming up year, we're going to get into it.
So for us in Michigan, things really don't start getting going until May. And then June hits and we have our fruit crops coming up. So for those of you that are not familiar with Michigan, we are the second most diverse agricultural state in the country, right behind California. So we do a lot of fruit crops, a lot of berry crops. And so those are primarily the fruit crops are the first things that come on in the beginning of the season. That'll run through generally about the end of June, and then we get into some of the wildflowers that will start coming up and some of the additional fruit crops. We do have a pretty serious dearth, meaning that there is no food available for bees from about the end of July through mid-August. That is generally one of the most critical times in the northern climates for bees because there's just not a lot of forage available. And then the fall comes on, and we do have a lot of forage available at that time. I mean, everything from goldenrod to a lot of your asters. So we have a pretty solid season all season long as far as forage availability, except for that dearth period. That's where the seasonality really gets kind of tough for us. And what we find from some of the research that we've done at MSU is actually that is when our bees in northern climates shift from crops that are generally pretty clean for them to crops that can be pretty detrimental. So meaning that they will actually shift to corn during that dearth. And a lot of us, those of you who are row crop farmers know that a lot of our crops are seed coated with neonics. And so that is a pretty critical time for bees, is if there is no forage available, that they'll actually shift over onto these plants that are not really great quality for them. And we do see some challenges with die out after those particular areas. So what we do to kind of augment that is generally we work with farmers and producers to make sure that there's cover crops in as well. So things like clover will bridge that gap. And so that will allow them to not have to go to some of those crops that may be a little more harsh on them.
That happens with us around November. So in November, we consolidate all our hives. So in November, we'll try, where we normally have 8 different yards with 20 pallets on each. In November, we'll try to get them to 2 or 3 just yards for maintenance-wise. Okay. So it's a lot easier than having, every time we go from one yard to another, it's about an hour and a half taking off. So during November, we do that.
Okay. Okay, I want to shift our conversation to talk about community and what that brings to beekeepers as mutual aid, culture, differences in opinion. I think that's a really important aspect about beekeeping. And it's, I think, a little bit of an analogy in terms of bees, the community of bees in a hive and how the community of beekeepers can work together or not. Yeah? So where do you find community? In terms of, okay.
So where I go for community is the Heroes to Hives program. So that is a program that I run. My wife and I started it in 2014, 2015. Started the program at our own farm with 5 buddies of mine that were veterans from the community. And that's basically how I get my community. So right now the program, it's a free 9-month program that we offer through MSU Extension. It's nationwide, both online and on ground. And that's basically where I get my community. When I'm sitting there teaching a group of 60 or 70 veterans, I mean, I feel like I'm at home. And, we talk about all sorts of stuff in the bee yard, not just related to bees. I mean, we talk about stuff that's hard to talk about sometimes. And so it really becomes a community of support. We have almost 500 alumni that have gone through our program, and they work with each other all the time to maintain that community. And I'll just give one real quick example of what that looks like. All of us in this room know somebody who is struggling with some sort of a disability that makes things tough. We have our oldest student in the Heroes to Hives program is a Korean War vet, and he has been keeping bees since 1960. But he's in an advanced age and just can't do it anymore. But he loves the bees. And so part of that community is being part of Heroes to Hives is that we connected him with a couple post 9/11 vets. And they work hand in hand in his apiary, maintaining his bees. The post 9/11 vets don't have land. They both live in apartments and don't have the opportunity to do it. So they come together. So I think that's where all of my community comes from as far as the beekeeping community when it's related to veterans. And in addition, I am very active in our state beekeeping association. And I think if you're interested in beekeeping, you need to get involved with your local bee club or your state bee association. That is where you're going to find your mentors. That is where you're going to get your local information that's relevant. It's where you're going to find your bees to purchase. So that is also a great place for community as well.
I think for me, any of you that have talked to me out here will notice that if you're going to be talking about bees, I can just go on about bees forever. It's kind of like the military, right? I love talking about my service. You get to run another veteran, and you get to talk to the military, and you can just go on and go on. So it's kind of the same thing with me with bees. But as far as work, in my work, as far as a commercial beekeeper, a lot of people try to keep their work, their secrets secret, right? So they don't share. My mentor is a veteran, and I think we just connect on it, and that guy will give you the shirt off his back. Just to give you an example, last year was me, Adam, and Gary were the speakers on the panel. Gary runs a program called SAFE in Kansas. This year, I told him, if you bring your bees up to California, I will find you a grower. And he just brought them out last week, so I couldn't tell him how to bring them out to California. I could give them in because I have no experience on that. But I said, if you can bring your bees out here, I will find you a grower and a bee yard to keep them at for the winter, and we'll even maintain them for you in the winter. And we're doing just that. But I love talking about bees, and I'm going to pass on my card. But if you guys ever have any questions, I'll give you everything I've learned. I can tell you 10 ways to do one thing, and they're all wrong. But really, there's 10 different ways to do everything, and every single one of them works. It's just which one works better for you.
Yeah, that's it, right? All right. I actually had a whole string of questions, but you guys managed to answer them all in one go. So finally, what are your opinions for the best way to learn beekeeping? Like, what advice would you give about? I mean, I almost feel like saying that they shouldn't follow what you did. Maybe you should just say, don't do what I did. The YouTube videos, yeah. That kind of scares me. No, seriously. But what kind of advice would you give for new beekeepers or even beekeepers who have been doing it for about a year? How can they educate themselves?
Hands-on experience to me is the best way. Just going out there and when you're opening your hive, if you are going to open it, you're going to take the frames out, pull them out, look at them, see what they're doing, and you'll catch things and you'll start to learn. And once you start learning how to find a queen, you can almost find her right away, right? So for instance, if I am looking for a queen because she's not laying right, and I want to take her out and eventually kill the queen and move it, I know that she's going to be where the fresh eggs just laid. So she's going to be in a frame that just has which I don't know if you guys know what it looks like, but it looks like a little piece of rice instead of a cone. So I know that where that egg is at, the queen's either going to be in that frame or the one right next to it. And so it takes out a lot of the work. But other than that, honestly, just YouTube. See different ways. Like I said, there's 4 or 5 different ways you can do a split. I can read a book and it's just not catch on. I have to be a hands-on person, which I brought some aids to show you guys how to do some of the stuff I do. Just because I'm straight up, you tell me, cut a paper towel in half, bring it out, and so I'm a hands-on type person.
So if you want to learn how to beekeep as a beginning beekeeper, you should take Heroes to Hives. But it's education is what it comes down to. I would say don't jump into this. Alex has had a great experience, but investing a lot of money into an agricultural activity that you may not have experience in is risky. It works out for some folks, it doesn't work out for others. but get yourself educated. Find a mentor, number one. Find somebody that you can just hang out with for a season and just shadow and see how they do it. Make sure it's someone who knows what they're doing, first of all. But find a mentor, and you're going to find those through your local bee clubs. I mean, in Michigan, we have, I think, almost 30 local bee clubs in the state. So most of you live in states that have pretty robust bee club organizations. So it's getting an education. I will say this, YouTube is very informative. But the problem with a lot of things on YouTube is that all of us have a camera that we can record what we do on. And a lot of the people that post things, and you can generally tell, some of these people are brand new and have no idea what they're talking about, using terminology that doesn't make any sense. You can pick those out. But I think the thing that most people struggle with YouTube, in particular I'll speak from Michigan, is that you're keeping bees in Michigan, but you may be watching a YouTube video from somebody in Alabama. And that management technique in Alabama does not apply to Michigan. And so what it causes is a lot of confusion. And I'll have people who will contact me and be like, look, I saw the big fat bee man do this thing on YouTube. I'm planning on doing that now. And I'll say, look, it's not the right time of the season for that. You need to be thinking about this now, not this. So just make sure that whatever you're looking at, if it's on YouTube, that it's relevant to your area. And then also look for reputable sources. So I'll do a plug, Michigan State University Beekeeping channel on YouTube. That is a university that's putting out stuff that is educational and is founded in science. It's not just founded in some hocus pocus. Ohio State has a great program. University Guelph in Ontario, Canada has a great program. Davis has a great program. So your universities, your land grant institutions, those are the institutions that you're generally going to want to look at for resources around beekeeping because you know it's going to be correct. It's not to say that other people don't have approaches that don't work, but it's risky when you can't determine what is correct and what's not. And another example, somebody who is not a university employee but does great work, basically out in California, scientificbeekeeping.com. Randy Oliver is the individual who runs that, and he is excellent at the information that he gives. He doesn't work for a university, but his information is comprehensive. And so you can look at his website and you can tell the guy knows what he's talking about. So just make sure you're vetting your resources before you jump, both feet into a management technique that somebody posted on YouTube.
I would also recommend to subscribe to the American Bee Journal.
Oh,
That's
yes.
where you're going to find a lot of your information as far as equipment costs for hiring people to do your bees. That's going to be the best resource for that type of information.
Yeah, the national organizations are huge. American Beekeeping Federation puts on an annual conference every year. This year it's just outside of Chicago. Those are really great resources to go to.
Let alone the state ones.
State ones as well,
have
yeah.
Conferences as well.
Yep.
And that's where you can meet a mentor.
Absolutely.
Which the only addition I'll have is just to echo you. I mean, mentor.
Yeah.
Have 5 mentors. Because actually I do have about 5 because I can't get into a hive without feeling like I need to text one of my mentors to overanalyze whatever I saw. And beekeepers love that, so it's okay. You're not really bothering them. Mentors don't care if you bug them.
No.
But that has really been crucial. I mean, I did a class. I was shadowed somebody for a year, and I still have these mentors and then I, of course, give it back. I mentor others, and that's what it's all about. We're going to let Alex give his presentation, and then we're going to do questions if we have time.
I'll try to run through this real fast.
Well, no, take your time. That's good stuff.
How much time do we have?
We have 30 minutes.
Okay, great.
Because I put some stuff over there for bee stuff, the frames and stuff. Can you bring that up here so I can get to them? How do I borrow that? No, it's the other stuff back there by the table. Okay, guys, this is just the way I do things. I mean, it's the right way, or it's just what worked for me. Your mic isn't on.
Oh, sorry, can I take it off?
Okay, is it up? Can you guys hear me? So, okay, this stuff is the way I do stuff. Doesn't mean it's the right way. Doesn't mean it's the only way. This is just some tips, right? So this is getting started. You're going to need a hive body. Man Lake, you can buy the hive bodies unassembled, which when you're on the commercial level, you want to go the cheapest way you can do things, right? So you can buy these fancy hives that'll cost you $200. Or you can go to Man Lake and buy a single unassembled hive for $13 and just put some nails to it, put it together. Lids are about $10, and all these prices are very inflated, so you can get them a lot cheaper, $2 to $3 cheaper. Frames are $2, unassembled. If you're buying 1,000 or more, they're $180. A feeder, which I'll show you the type of feeder that I use, is $675. Smoker, about $42. You can find them on Amazon for cheaper, and they work just fine. Hive tool, $795. Bee jacket. If you don't mind the stinging so much, I don't wear a whole suit. I just wear a jacket. Half the time, I don't even have my veil on, unless I go up to a hive and I know it's pissed off, or I'm extracting honey, then I'll throw the veil on. But half the time, I don't even throw my veil on. Reason: if you get too hot, then it's no fun. So try to go with comfort. Package of bees in California, they're about $100 for 3 pounds of bees, $25 for a queen. This is California again, where I live. This is a swinger type forklift. This is a swinger and a Hummer-Bee forklift. They're probably the most popular forklifts for commercial size operations. That's the one that I got from Farmer Veterans Coalition. And what that does is it can pick up 3 pallets with 2-story hives. So I'm picking up 12 hives at one time to load on a flatbed. This is our flatbed right here. If you notice the top, the U-clamps on the top, that's so you can just go over the top of the hive, so they're spaced out where they go directly on a 4-way pallet where you're strapping every hive. So all we need is 4 straps to strap our hives in. And this flatbed is a 16-foot flatbed, and we load 20 pallets on it. And we only go 2 stories high on our pallets. You can go up to 3. This is a 4-way pallet. And anybody that wants this class, if you guys just get a hold of FVSC, I don't care if they share it with you guys. So this is the dimensions for a 4-way pallet. So you put 4 beehives on each pallet. One of the biggest, most important things about this is this bee space right here, right? So that wood right there is one of the more important parts. You don't want it too big, otherwise in the winter they're going to get too cold, or you're going to get mice and stuff inside of them. So that's very important. This trailer for the forklift right here. These are very expensive. That trailer right there is like $16,000. You don't have to use that type of trailer, but that's just the one that's designed specifically for beekeeping forklifts. All right, so this is the maintenance that we do. This kind of our calendar is in early January, we begin to inspect our hives, right? So like I said, whenever you're going into pollination, you're promising a 5-frame minimum, 8-frame average. What that means is every single, doesn't mean you have to have 5-frame minimum on each hive, but if you're putting in a bunch of hives and you have a 2-frame beehive, and when it gets inspected, that's gonna bring your average way, way down, especially if you have a 0. You can have banging bees and you throw a bunch of zeros in there, they're gonna bring your average down, and that, contract-wise, that brings your price down. Mid-January, we'll place the hives into the orchards. March, feed if needed. You should definitely feed once you get inside the orchard. It kind of just gets the bees motivated. They're waking up from the winter, gets them working. April, start making queens. So in April, we'll go into the orchards if they're still in the orchards, and we'll start identifying our strongest hives. And that's where we're going to graft our queens out of. There's a lot of ways to graft. I personally like that system right there, which I'll pass around, and I'll talk about that just a little bit. My brother-in-law does it inside of a pickup with the heater blasting and with the Chinese grafting tool, and which is the way you can do it. You can also buy a little shed, and just as long as you have good lighting and heat, that's how he does it with the Chinese grafting tool. And so basically, you're taking the larva after it's laid. But then as soon as it lays down, you're putting it inside a little capsule. And then once they cap it, you pull it out. On day 9 or 10, you put it inside of a queenless hive, and then you have a brand new colony. So this is the way I use this frame. What you do is it's got another plastic thing on the other side. And so you trap the queen, and you put her inside of this little box. And the queen lays directly on these capsules right here. And so about day 5 after I put it in, I'll go through here, and I'll pull each one of these capsules, and I'll put them onto this other frame right here, onto this frame, and on about day 10, I'll take each one of these capsules and put them into a mating nuke or inside of a queenless hive. It could be a commercial, it doesn't have to be a mating nuke. And then so the idea is that the new queen is going to hatch on the new beehive, and I'll pass these around so you guys can see. Again, this is one key note about this. You can find this on eBay really cheap. Doesn't work. Buy the one from Man Lake, which is like $100. It's more expensive, but it works. So if you want to pass those around. And whenever you're pulling them out, what you do is you take this little thing right here. You want to nail these down to this frame, right? And you grab this, And whenever you're pulling the capsules out, you just pinch it and it'll come with it. Put it back in there and put it inside of a queenless hive. You want to put them around the brood. So what I do is I put 2 of these frames inside of a queenless hive, and the queens or the bees will just feed it the royal jelly and make a queen. So every one of those capsules will be a queen if they all take. What did I do with that remote? Sorry. There it is. So April, start making queens. May, queens should be laying like crazy. Get honey supers ready. Start checking disease and mites. So that's about when we do our first. We do mite treatment every quarter, and we use Tactic. All right. So there's different things you can use for on the commercial side. I think every single person I've ever talked to uses Tactic. So June, unless you're on, like I know Adam can't use Tactic because he's on a education side of it, but June, take preventative measures for swarming. So that's when your bees are going to be just overfilled, and you want to do a split before your bees leave, right? July, continue to check for disease. Continue supers were needed. Check colonies for queen production. August, add supers were needed. Continue making queens and building your queen bank. So does everybody know what a queen bank is? So a queen bank is it's a hive that you're keeping queens, right? So you want it to be queenless. And they feed the queens, right? So you can make queens, and you don't have to use them right away. You can put them inside of but these are queens that are already laying, right? So whenever you're grafting, you take out a virgin and you put her in a nuke. Usually you harvest queens whenever she starts laying, and then you can put those inside a little cage, and you put it in a queen that's full of bees, and you have to feed it. That's what's important about it. You have to keep feeding it, and you can put protein patties in it, and so they'll keep the queens alive. If you're going to keep them for a long time, you want to switch them from cage to cage. But September, harvest honey. We only harvest one time a year because our focus is pollination. It's not the honey. I actually have 300 gallons of honey in my garage right now that I don't know what to do with. October, feed if necessary. Should be getting ready for winter. November, like I said, we consolidated all our hives. We're starting to screw the tops on, and we try not to get back into them until January. But this is late November when we do that. So December, we don't do anything. We go on break. Equipment, these are the best feeders that I found. Motherlode sells them. And then these are just some other resources on where to buy equipment. Bennett Apiary sells they sell four-way pallets and lids. The best place I found if you're in California is a used pallet company. So wherever you're at, if you can go find a used pallet company, they can do 4-way pallets for really, really inexpensive off of recycled wood. We pay $16 a pallet. Gary, I know they charge like $90, which is insane. So again, these are just some resources. These are some of the diseases you're going to find. Left is the wax moth. The right is the mites. Bottom left is the hive beetle. And the bottom right is American foulbrood. The beetle, I don't know what to do because we don't have that problem in California, at least not where I'm at, Northern California. The only time we do have hive beetles for a little bit is after pollination. Mm-hmm. We'll get some with the hive beetles, but they don't survive, so we really don't do anything for it. Pollination-wise, you move them after so you want to you don't want to move your bees into pollination too early because they start establishing routes. So you want to start right when the bloom starts. Otherwise, they establish routes and they're not going to go to the pollination. So if you want the best, most effective way or pollination, you want to move them right when it starts. The other thing is in California, you want to put all your hives with the entrances facing east to west because the wind blows north to south. And so you want, in the winter, if it's too cold, the bees won't come out. So that's why you want to place them east to west, right? Most beekeepers move at night. Place sets of 4 pallets, 500 feet interval, spread across the orchard. Most of the time, the grower is going to tell you exactly where he wants them. And you want to put them where it's going to get the most sun exposure. Place hives in heavy sunlight. Anyways, so this is what my pollination contract looks like right here. The only change I'm going to make to this contract this year, and it's from our range from last year, is that we're going to add that if for whatever reason the hive dies due to weather, then the farmer's responsible. So once the hive is placed in the orchard, the farmer's responsible. And the reason that happened is because last year we got a lot of heavy rain, and a lot of beekeepers' bees got washed out, and they were stuck in legal battles whether the farmer's going to pay for it or not going to pay for it. That happened to my mentor, so we're going to add to our contract that once the bees are placed, where the farmer tells us where to place them, if they die because of the weather, meaning floods, then they still have to pay for the hive. And then the other thing is that they have to pay for any legal fees if we do have to go to court for them not paying on time or whatever. They have to pay for legal fees. So we're gonna be adding that this year. But this is my contract that I use right here. All right, so side-by-side split. Do you know how I can play that?
Oh,
This is a video.
yeah. Yeah, thank you.
This is how, the best way that I know how to make splits. So it's called a side-by-side split. Not playing? You guys how to do what we call a side-by-side split. So you have a 4-way pallet with 4 beehives, both on supers. So what we want to do is we want to take both of these hives, we're going to do a split, and they're going to go into this position and this position on the new pallet, right? So for example, we would take the top hive right here, then it's full of bees, pretend to have bees. We would move it to this position, right here. We'll take the lower part, put it on the other one right here. That way, when we go back after 2 days to see where the queen is at, we know that these 2 hives at one point were 1 hive. So if the queen is in this hive, that means this one is queenless. Or if the queen is in this hive, then that means this one is queenless. So what you do with the other ones, you would go take this top hive and move it into this position, as such. You would do the same thing with the other side. Those 2 would go to this brand new pallet, and those 2 would stay on the old pallet. Does everybody understand that and that concept? It's pretty simple, and it's the best way to do hives where you're not looking for a queen, so you don't know where the queen's at, because again, that's very time consuming. So what we do is we'll do this method right here. Once we do the split, we'll take it to another yard. So you don't want to you can't keep it in the same yard, but sometimes they'll go back to the old hive. So we'll take it to a completely new yard, or just take it away quite a distance, or as much distance as you can. So it's a simple concept. That way you're not checking for the queen, because after 2 days, they're going to start trying to make a new queen, right? So that's how you know which side the queen stayed on. And like I said, you know that these 2 hives right here at one point were 1. So it's very simple. If this one starts to make cells, you know the queen's here, right? So it's very the easiest way to make a split.
You need to check if there's already existing, like a queen cup.
No, well, you're going to put the new. So whenever you harvest the queen cups out of there, whichever one you determine doesn't have a queen is where you're going to put the cell right before it hatches, right? Again, this is how I do my queen rearing. This is the equipment. You don't really need an incubator. The only time you need an incubator is if you're dedicated to making queens. And what you want to do is, once they're capped out, you can put them into an incubator and then just let them grow out and hatch out onto not into the incubator, the little cages. But again, you don't need an incubator as long as you have a nuke or something you're putting the cell into. This is the queen rearing timetable. So, again, egg hatches. As soon as it lays down and it's got the little liquid stuff is when you want to graft it if you're doing the Chinese grafting method. Cells are sealed on by day 8. You don't want to touch them between, is it 8 and 9, Adam, I believe? When the wing is forming?
Yeah.
You absolutely do not want to disturb them at all. Yeah. So keeping a time when you're making queens is very important. Otherwise, you're going to have one that's going to hatch and it's going to kill all your other cells. If you have a queen virgin that hatches and you don't have it inside of a cage, she'll kill all the other cells. Lessons learned: keeping bees is a lot more work than just buying a box of bees, sending them out in the field. It's a lot easier, in my opinion, and cheaper to buy assembled equipment if you're doing it on a commercial scale, right? For example, if you're making a 4-way pallet and you're making it at a scratch, you're about $25 into it, minus or plus the man hours that it takes you. You can buy it for $16 at a used. That's what we get them for, $16 at a used pallet place. Again, if you guys want this, just ask them to give it to you.
Does anybody have any questions for me?
I got a question for the group. Have any of you done any experimentation with fungi to keep down varroa mites? Or is that just a bunch of hocus pocus?
What was your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I heard it. He was asking. Yeah, he was asking about using fungi to control varroa mite. So there was a study that just came out in Nature, the peer-reviewed journal Nature this year. Paul Stamets was the lead author on it and talked about this idea that they've identified fungi that are entomopathogenic, meaning that it's fungi that attacks insects. So yes, there is some preliminary research that's come out on that. I will caution you though. Using fungi to attack insects when you have insects inside of a beehive can be dangerous. So they have not worked out all the kinks in this. They've identified that it does attack and kill the varroa mite. The problem with that is, and this is something that you all should take very, very seriously, and this gets back to kind of our YouTube conversation. There are a lot of ways people are trying to control varroa mite. Most of them are unregistered, unlabeled mechanisms for control. Anytime you put something in a beehive with the intention of controlling another organism, it is a pesticide application. Pesticide applications are regulated by the government through the Federal Insecticide, Rodenticide, and Fungicide Act. Anytime you put something in a beehive that is not a registered, labeled chemical, whatever it is, organic or otherwise, anytime you're doing it, we call it an off-label application, you are essentially making an illegal pesticide application on your hives. So there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about, I'm going to solve all my varroa mite problems with essential oils. That is an off-label pesticide application. And if you are selling that to the consumer, and something were to happen, you are liable for making an illegal pesticide application. So be very careful. That is a study that just came out. It's going to take another 5 or 10 years to formulate some sort of delivery device. But make sure when you're managing pests in your beehives that you're using things that are established control mechanisms. It's really important because you as a consumer wouldn't want somebody just putting something in a beehive thinking that it's going to control the varroa mite, when it could actually contaminate the honey that you're purchasing. And a lot of the mechanisms that we use to control varroa mite are volatile. They're gases. And those gases can oftentimes penetrate those wax cappings that have honey in them because they're porous and they will contaminate the honey. The other thing to keep in mind when you're doing pesticide applications is read the label, because you are legally bound by that label to use it correctly. And if you use it incorrectly, for example, with a lot of especially varroa mite applications, there are very few chemicals you can use to control varroa mite when you are producing honey that is going to be consumed. And some of the stuff that's out there, like Checkmite, if you put that on while you have honey supers on, it will contaminate your honey, and that honey should not be sold for human consumption. So be very careful about what you're doing when it comes to control of varroa mite. This is a very promising avenue that a lot of us in the research community see with potentially using fungus to control these insects. There's also been a lot of work on other beneficial insects that control varroa mites. These are called pseudoscorpions. They look like a varroa mite, but they have little scorpion pinchers. That has been looked at for decades, or I shouldn't say decades, about the last, I'd say 8 or 9 years. The problem with that is we just haven't found a way to rear enough of them to sell and give you to put in your beehives. So, although there's a lot of research going on around varroa mites, since 1996, the USDA has been pouring millions of dollars into research around varroa mite. The big problem with varroa mite is that it is a non-native species to European honeybees. And so it is essentially like your invasive plants in your field that you can't seem to control because they just take up any residency where they can. It's the same kind of thing. It's an invasive. And so managing it's important, but making sure that using the right materials to manage it is paramount. You are selling this product, honey, to a consumer. And you have to take that into consideration, just like you would with any of your vegetables and your post-harvest handling, all of that stuff. It's all back to food safety.
Question over here.
I have a question I want to lead into for Adam and Sarah, mostly. I will give you a little bit of background to my question. I'll try to make that quick. In 2016, I believe it was, I was going through my MBA, and my first class I had to form a company. And so I started the Patriot Bee Company, and I got a really good grade on the project. And in return, somebody said, hey, have you ever heard about Farmer Veteran Coalition? And I was like, no. And so I turned that into Farmer Veteran Coalition, and that turned into a fellowship grant. At that time, we bought 20 hives, and I want to reiterate a little bit on what you two said about how difficult it is to jump into that scale of production, even at just 20 hives, what we did. And then I got deployed. I'm still out on a C-130 pilot, and we lost almost all of our hives. When we got that, we got our bees in from Georgia, and so here's where I transitioned to my question. We're a beyond organic farm, and we've transitioned it well beyond just beekeeping now, and probably that would be one of the lesser things we do on our farm now. But with that, we realized just how hard it is to keep bees and do it in a I don't know how to say what I'm saying. How do you walk the line between selling beyond organic products, but knowing that it's almost impossible nowadays with the knowledge that I currently have to keep bees without a lot of chemicals? Where is that line? And additionally, have you dealt with the hive beetles, and what's been your best way to combat that? Because ours were absolutely freaking full of hive beetles, and it was devastating.
So in the Heroes to Hives course, I cover all of the chemicals that are available for varroa mites, but we only train on 2 chemicals, and they are both organic. Formic acid and oxalic acid are the only 2 things we use to manage varroa mite. So for an organic producer, that is what you want to focus on. Formic acid during the season, and that's when the honey's on, and you can use formic acid is one of the very few chemicals you can use when honey supers are on. That product is either sold as Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro are the 2 formulations that they have of that. That's what you use all season long. So you do your varroa mite checks every 3 or 4 weeks. If you got a high enough number, you put an application in. When you get to the off season and brood production ceases, and where are you at?
West Virginia.
West Virginia. So when you get into the cold season and the queens will stop raising brood at some point during the season. Then you use oxalic acid at that point in time. And the reason you use oxalic is because oxalic acid, although it's a vapor, does not penetrate the cappings of the brood. So varroa mite, and we're going to get into some detail, but varroa mite reproduces inside of capped brood. So that's why you don't see them, is because they're inside the brood. So with oxalic, because you don't have capped brood, you can take care of them with that. And that's something you would use when honey supers are off. So those are your 2 organic methods that you can use. When it comes to small hive beetle, that is a totally regional problem. We don't have it in northern Michigan, we have it in southern Michigan. I was in Virginia giving a talk a year ago, and that is a huge problem in that area of the country. Even below us in Ohio and Illinois, it's a big problem. So for small hive beetle, there's a couple ways that you can control it. Number 1, they have the Swiffer pad, the beetle begone sheets is what they market it as. You can use those, it's a good trapping mechanism. You can also use just beetle traps, and they have the gel traps that you basically put in there, and you can use that. It's very messy. The best way that I have found to control small hive beetle is actually through beneficial nematodes. So small hive beetle, when it reproduces, it actually pupates in the soil right in front of your beehive. So the larva actually comes out, it drops to the soil, and then it buries down in the soil and it pupates. And then when it becomes an adult, it gets out of the soil and goes back into your beehive. So that's a vulnerable spot. And when you're thinking about controlling pests, you always want to think about when are they most vulnerable. Killing a beetle that's moving around in the hive is tough to do, but killing something that's stationary in the soil, you have a target that you're on. So Arbico Organics, ARBICO Organics, has an entomopathogenic nematode. This is a nematode that attacks insects in the soil. And so the best way to do this, you buy it, I think last year when I bought some, I think it was like $30 or $40 for a pack. And that would get you enough to do like about 100 square feet. Basically, it's a pack of these nematodes. And nematodes, if you're not familiar with nematodes, they're basically worms that are very small that live in the soil in huge numbers. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Root knot nematode, some of you may be familiar with that. That's a bad one. These Steinernema is the genus of this nematode. It's a beneficial nematode. So buy that particular product. If you just look up Arbico Organics and small hive beetle, it'll be the first thing that comes up. You basically take that, you put it into a watering can, and then you just water the soil right in front of your hives. And those nematodes, particularly in the area you're at, will proliferate through the soil. You do it at the beginning of the season, right when things start to thaw, put it all over your apiary, and those nematodes will decimate those small hive beetles. And the nice thing about them is they continue to live in the soil. So year after year, they'll continue to reproduce, and as long as they have stuff to eat, insects in the ground, they will continue to reproduce year after year. That is the best way that I have found to control it. It may take a couple of years to get them fully under control, but stay on it, and the organic, that biological control will work.
And so you only have to apply it once.
What was that?
Essentially, you only have to apply it once.
You'll apply it once, and as long, it depends. So if your soil freezes, if like the top 7 inches of your soil freezes, you may have to do another application year to year. But if you're like where I'm at, where we get 200 inches of snow a year, and the soil is primarily stays about 50 degrees, they'll continue to proliferate in that soil. The thing, and Alex, you touched on it, that you guys don't have small hive beetle. I'm originally from California too. I never even heard of small hive beetle when I first got into beekeeping. But on the East Coast and in the Midwest, we have it a lot. The one thing to keep in mind is the reason that we have it so bad is because we have wet soils. In California, they're dry soils, and so the pupa die in the soil. There's not enough moisture to keep them alive. So generally, in places where we have moist soils is where we find them. But that would be your best bet. And that, being an organic producer, that's going to be absolutely your best mechanism. So what I would recommend is do the nematodes and then use the Swiffer sheets. You don't have to buy the Beetle Begone sheets either if you're a beekeeper. You can buy the Swiffer pads that are unscented and use those, and they're a hell of a lot cheaper. But throw some Swiffer pads in there. Those will trap the beetles, and then you'll have the backup, which is basically taking care of that vulnerable life stage.
Have you ever heard of, I've been told that dryer sheets work for that too. And I don't know if that's true or not.
I haven't used dryer sheets. I mean, it's essentially what happens, as long as they're unscented, I think. Yeah, so as long as, it's basically what happens with small hive beetle in these sheets, is the bees will chew on the sheets. It makes them kind of fluffy. The small hive beetles are always trying to hide from the bees. And so they'll generally like tuck up in corners and things like that where bees can't get to them. So they tuck into these materials, and then their claws, they're called tarsi at the end of their claws, or end of their feet, get caught on the material and they can't get out. So it's kind of like, it's a trap.
And they trick the bees to think that there's another bee until the bees feed them.
Yeah. So, but good organic methods to do it. I mean, small hive beetles are a tough thing to control, but you get that life stage in the soil and it'll take care of most of your problems.
Guys, this thing is awesome for doing washes, so checking your mites. It's called Varroa Easy Check. So what you do is you mix it with alcohol, and essentially there's a line in here that gives you what the measurement is, how many bees you put it in, and then you're going to drown them, right? You shake them for about 30 seconds, and then you stir it and let it settle to alcohol and water, and then your mites are going to drop down to the bottom, and you'll be able to count them. And so you want to treat for mites when you're at a 5%. So the way you do that is you multiply your amount of mites that you count to, is it 3 or 30?
300, so it's 300 bees,
300.
yeah, that are in there, yep.
And so if you're at 5%, that's when you want to treat for mites. So this thing is awesome for checking for mites.
And that's variable, I would say, across the country. So 5% is working probably for a lot of the commercial beekeepers. We train at 3%. So if you have 9 mites per 300 bees, it's time to start thinking about treating. I would say, I talk beekeeping all the time. I have beekeepers from all across the country that call me every day talking about questions. And I'll tell you that 90% of loss in the United States is due to varroa mite. It's a global epidemic, and we really have our work cut out for us. Even though we've been working on this for the last 25 years, it's still not a done deal.
I have a question for Alex. Do you have any issue with colony collapse and monotropic up there, or no?
So we have about 10% loss. My mentors were like at 25%, but yeah, it's just a small number.
Not a beekeeper, but a question. And since you've been working on this, and you're familiar with the literature, there's lots of different kinds of bees. It's not just Phoebus mellifera. Is there continued work on the genetics of the bees to get resistant?
To varroa mite? Yeah, so there has been, if you're interested in bees, let me back up here. So varroa mite, the reason it's such a problem is because the bees actually don't know it's there. So it has this ability, we call it chemical camouflage, where anything it touches, it takes the smells of that object. So it smells just like the bees. So they're essentially invisible in the hive. And the reason that's a problem is because the bees, if they don't know they're there, they can't do anything about it. So there has been concerted breeding efforts in the United States since 1996 to develop a line of honeybees that can identify those small differences in smells between Varroa mite and another bee. And so there's been concerted efforts, millions of dollars spent on this. There are lines of honeybees that we call hygienic, meaning that they can detect Varroa mite and they will remove it from the hive. The lines of bees that do that naturally are the Russian bees. And the reason that we think the Russians have that ability to do it is because they are from the eastern portion of Russia, which is actually where Varroa mite is from. Varroa mite is actually originated on Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee. And then once we started bringing European honeybees into that area of Asia, they essentially jumped species. They went from Apis cerana to Apis mellifera. And so we're trying to figure out what those nuances are in the genome to figure out how we can breed bees to do that. So Russians have a natural ability to do that. I will say this, and I was talking to somebody about this earlier, they tend to be a little more aggressive and less honey producers. But there are other lines out there. Varroa-sensitive hygienic bees, we call them VSH bees. Those are lines of honeybees that have that ability to detect and remove. Purdue ankle biters, produced by Purdue University, is another line of bees that has that ability to do that. Minnesota Hygienics, developed by Marla Spivak at University of Minnesota. That is another line of honeybees that does that. So there are very big efforts. Sue Kobe out at UC Davis has been doing this in artificial insemination to actually identify how we can get those genes in to bees for years. We have not, there's no silver bullet to it though. And the problem with it is, and you think about this, so we breed these queens to have these hygienic behaviors, we put them into a beehive, by the time that queen has lived her life and brings another queen on deck, those genes get diluted. And so we lose that quality in the species. So it's been a tough battle. And I'll be quite honest, I mean, I do this for a living. And there's no easy answer to any of this. It's a multi-factor problem that we're really trying to face but having trouble doing.
Which is why beekeeping is so much fun. It's a challenge every day. Well, thank you so much for sitting in on this panel, and thank you, Alex and Adam, for all of your great information and knowledge. Please